We are the Women in Product panel from Google, and my name is Shimrit, and I have a group of senior leaders from Google who also are my friends in real life. How awesome is that? That we have come together and share a little bit about our journey, how we got to the roles that we have today, how we are looking at the past few months and at all the ambiguity and challenges that we have been navigating. And so let's hear now a little bit more in depth about each one of us and our journeys up until now. And so I can start. My name is Shimrit Ben-Yair. I lead Google Photos. And I've been at Google for 11 years now, since I graduated from business school in 2009. Before business school, I was a software engineer in Tel Aviv, which is where I was born and raised, and then on Wall Street in New York City, and kind of took the sort of engineer to PM route, which is technically like the common route, although it didn't feel very common to me at all. When I was in engineering, it felt like product was so far from me, and I was like, how on earth would I get there? And for me, one of the big actually ways to get there was through business school. I went to MIT Sloan. I am based in Mountain View. Actually, I could walk to Google if we were there, but I'm not walking there right now. I'm working from home for the past 7 months, as we all, or for the most part, are. And I'm a mom of 3 children. I have my son Tor is 9, my daughter Lena is 6, and my baby is almost 3. And I think I have to stop calling her baby at some point because she's like 3. So that's a little bit about me. And now I will hand it off to Rose to introduce herself.
Thanks, Shimrit. So as Shimrit said, my name is Rose Yao, and I lead product for Google Nest right now. So the thermostats, the cameras, hopefully you guys have some of these products in your house right now, helping you. I've been a product manager for 15 years now, which is kind of crazy to say because I always feel like I'm just starting out on this journey and there's so much to learn. My background was in engineering, so I was a computer engineer. And my dad is a physicist. My mom also has a PhD in linguistics. So to be honest, the goal was for me to get a PhD, do research, maybe become a professor. That was the expected path. And when I decided my senior year to actually take a job in industry, and the only reason my parents were okay with it was because Google has such a stellar reputation for being a research-focused, intellectually challenging place to be. And they were also hoping that I would go back to school in a year or 2. So 15 years later, I still have not gotten my advanced degree, but I feel like I've learned a lot by being a product manager. And I've gotten very lucky in that I've had a chance to work on some pretty amazing products that at a very early stage. So it was one of the first PMs on Gmail. I was early at Facebook, where I helped work on the mobile products from HTML5 to the transition to native and thinking about the platform pieces. So I came back to Google about 3 years ago to actually learn how to build an enterprise business. And then just recently, my latest adventure is coming back from my mat leave, my first baby. She's turning 1 tomorrow. So actually, I don't know what time it will be, but she'll be 1. Coming back from mat leave and joining Google Nest and learning about hardware. So I'm going to pass it to Erin next.
So my name is Erin Teague. I am originally from Detroit, Michigan, and studied computer science and computer engineering, and then was also a software engineer originally in my career, also on Wall Street. And so also went to business school to get my MBA, which was the transition period for me to move from being a software engineer and to transition into product. A mentor of mine really encouraged me to interview at Google. And at the time, YouTube was starting the VR, virtual reality team. And again, kind of scratching that start new product initiative itch, which is probably the consistent theme throughout my career. I decided to join YouTube. So I've been at YouTube for the past a little over 4 years now. And I worked on VR, AR, all things immersive video. And now I am focused on sports. I started our live sports initiative. in June, YouTube also started a racial justice initiative, and I'm leading product for that work as well. So lots of awesome new things at YouTube that I've been responsible for working on, which is great. I guess the fun fact for me is I'm a runner, although in COVID, I haven't done that as much. And so that's the sort of coping mechanism that I've had to adjust to, which has been interesting. So that's me, and I will hand it off to Lilian.
That's amazing, Erin. So yeah, so I'm Lilian Rincon. I lead the features for the Google Assistant across the various surfaces. And I guess a little bit about me, I consider myself a citizen of the world because I had this very unusual upbringing. For those of you that don't know, I'm half Spanish, half Chinese. I grew up in Venezuela. My first language is Spanish. I lived in Vancouver, Canada, and then I lived in Bandung, Indonesia. And then back to Canada, back to South America, back to Canada. My second language I consider to be math, actually, because it was the only universal language that worked across the 3 different countries that I was in. And I learned English in an ESL class. And through this actually developed a love for math because I could actually still do math as I was learning English. This kind of led, I think, to computing science, actually, because a lot of computing science was basically math. And so I liked that. Eventually led to a career as a software engineer. So like Shimrit, I also started as an engineer. Got recruited, actually, through all of this to a big company called Microsoft in Seattle. And so that's how I left Canada. And was one of the first PMs there in their advertising platform. This was around the time that Bill Gates was still there. And I would say, in thinking back through, reflecting through my career, some of the biggest moments in my careers have happened not necessarily through the job I was supposed to be doing, but actually through passion projects. And I think I relate this back to my early days at Microsoft. When Bill Gates was CEO of Microsoft, he used to have this thing called Think Weeks, where anyone in the company could write a paper. And so within 6 months, let's say, of joining Microsoft, I wrote a paper on a self-service advertising marketplace that would connect artists to small to medium businesses. And he funded it. And honestly, that's how I became a lead at Microsoft very early on. And then got recruited, actually, to the Bay Area to work for Skype. At some point when I was in Skype, I decided to write a memo on machine learning and bots and how I thought that Skype could go into having bots instead of just talking from people to people. And this led to the Skype bot framework, which led to, I think, Google noticing. And so that's how they pinged me, actually. And I ended up coming to Google to work on the Google Assistant, which was the super bot, let's say. So I work in the Bay Area. I'm a mom of 2 kiddos under 7. In non-COVID times, I like to explore the world. That's me. Back to you, Shimrit.
That's awesome. You know, listening to all these personal stories that I kind of have heard bits and pieces of throughout the years, I think it's interesting to note a couple of interesting themes that interweave in them. The first is, at least some of us have had this route of engineering to product, but actually I think that that is not the only route into product. And in fact, so many other disciplines do well as PMs coming into Google, be it coming from data science, be it coming from even learning to code on your own, like through a Python course. You can come in from marketing into product. You can come in from UX into product. And so I want to make sure that our anecdotal experiences, which I think also reflect kind of when we joined Google and how, and like our time in our life, are not the only way to do it. The second point is just around, look at how many different intersections and companies we've all worked at. I didn't talk about all the projects I've done at Google. Maybe we'll touch on it a little bit later, but none of us have actually just stayed in one team and just grown in one team. It really is critical to find the right time to make a move and also to know when is not the right time to make a move. And then the third point that a few of us touched on, and I think is really critical, is how many connections come through mentors, or even Lilian touched on it, recruiting incoming calls. I know that I'm sure some of you are receiving those and kind of not sure what to do with them. And I'm of the opinion that if this company is interesting to you at some point, take the call, build the relationship. You don't want to start looking for a job the day you're eager to look for a job. You want to do it like 6 months in advance. And so it's interesting to see these things interweave. And thank you all for sharing so candidly. All right, so let's transition into the second topic we wanted to discuss today, which is how we have been dealing with the past 7 months. And so I think, to say that this is a challenging time is really a very big understatement, right? It started with COVID hitting 7 months ago, which was overwhelming on its own, right? Like the economic uncertainty, the inability to have our usual support networks, be it school, be it seeing family. Then at the same time, the devastating police violence towards the Black plus community, that just added a tremendous layer of injustice and angst and anger. And so we want to talk about this topic through two angles. The first is, how have we been dealing with personally? Have we been able to deal with it on a personal level? And how are we dealing with it professionally? And how are we kind of leading through these difficult times? So let's start maybe a little bit on the personal tools and methodologies. Let's start with Erin. What do you have some thoughts on how to cope during this time?
Interestingly, I'm basically like scared of any virus in general. And so the COVID virus and the fact that it was new and novel and we didn't know much about it was particularly challenging. And it didn't help that I have a friend who works at the NIH who gave me all this intel very early about how scary COVID is. And then I think many folks know, it's decently documented now, but COVID has disproportionately impacted vulnerable communities. Throughout the months of March and April, my family actually lost 5 people to COVID. And so that's devastating, right? Because it's difficult to figure out how to cope and how to, grieve during this time, particularly when you're remote, et cetera. And so that was hard. And then obviously in May, the death of George Floyd, the killing of George Floyd, really sort of heightened awareness around racial and social injustice and police brutality, which is also triggering for me. The police were never a safe entity for me. It was never a place to go to call for help. So anyway, it's just this compounded impact of the environment. And the first thing that I think is really important, particularly sort of being a part of this community, a part of the Black community, is really to take the time and just acknowledge that it's hard, right? Like, and that's okay. To Shimrit's point, as a leader, you feel this pressure to keep it together. And I've actually found a lot of power in these moments to just be vulnerable and be open about what is hard about this moment, but say, hey, I'm not okay right now. And here's why, and I'm going to power through. And it's amazing to just kind of see how the people in your life will help kind of fill those gaps in support of you during these difficult times. And so the second thing that I've done is really investing in meditation 2 to 3 times a day. And just the 20 minutes helps me recenter. It puts all of the things that are 2020 into perspective, and it's very grounding. So those are my coping mechanisms.
Yeah, it just hearing you talk about it, right? It's so much, right? Like, it's funny to think it's October because it's hard to mark time this year too, right? I found that in some ways this year I needed to be more conscious about self-care, right? And more intentional about it. So I think I mentioned that I took on a new job right before COVID started. Literally the week I said yes, I think I went to my new boss and said, so shelter in place is happening. Should we still do this? And he's like, sure, why not? It'll be over in a couple months. No big deal. All right. And at that time, I just came back from maternity leave with a brand new baby, and I'm a first-time mom. So those of you who have gone through this, it is life-changing already, and I haven't slept for more than 4 hours at a time for months, right? So that's always fun. And like all of you guys, I wanted to show up really well. I wanted to make a good first impression. I had a lot of people to get to know. So I remember the first few months, it was just really stressful to set boundaries, right? The number of meetings, especially now that we're in COVID and doing everything over video, right, was just, like I could be on video calls from like midnight to, midnight basically if I chose to, right? Especially with a global team to a certain extent. So it actually took a second where I think at one point my husband said to me when I was answering a not very important message over dinner, it's like, hey, you need to be present. We don't have a lot of time together. I need you to like put this down. It was a good wake-up call for me, which is like the only person who can set boundaries is me, right? And even though it's a new team, like I have to lead with my whole self, and kind of what Erin's saying, I had to be vulnerable and authentic, and me just saying like, hey, I don't take meetings after 5 o'clock. It's family time. And it's actually really, I think, empowering for my team to know that I'm taking that time and those boundaries, and they can too. On a personal level, I found beyond just like actually taking the time is I need to get away from screens in my time of self-care, and I need to be creative about it. So I try to work out at least 4 times a week, even when I don't want to, because I recognize what it does for me in terms of my mood and sustainability. And then the other thing that Shimrit and a couple other folks know about is got really into watercolor during early days of COVID. So like after bedtime, sometimes I'll go upstairs to my office and I'll watercolor, and it's nothing crazy. I watch YouTube tutorials, right, to do it. But it's a way that's completely non-digital. It's a way for me to feel creative, to use the other side of my brain. And it's something I can do even when the air quality is terrible and we can't go outside, right? To immerse myself into something that I made something. I tried sourdough. That didn't work out. It felt like breastfeeding, where there's just like too much nursing of the starter and like complicated timing. So, these days I bake cupcakes with instant baking powder.
It's interesting. You kind of both mentioned this gap between reality and impressions, and this need to really project this like powerful, visage, right? And I think that it's important to remember, I really love this sentence, the opposite of perfection is freedom, right? And so we put in so much to putting together this super polished, super capable look, but it comes at a huge cost. A big part of the toil of women is in putting together that very, very put together, meticulous, I'm on my A game at work, at home, I got this, and at what cost is that coming to us? And sort of like, what can we give up to maintain our sanity and actually like turn that torch inward rather than outward. So I think like these are great words of wisdom. And so I know we're running short of time, so let's do 2 more things. Let's talk about COVID professionally, how we've dealt with these changing times, and then we can do a wrap up. And so Lilian, how have you been helping your team navigate through this ambiguity?
For me, actually, exactly to your point, Shimrit, in some ways I did the opposite. Very early on with COVID, I realized like I have 2 kids under 7, and both their schools were, we had to figure out how to learn at home, and we were not sure about the nanny and everything. So my husband and I just made the decision right away to move to this like part-time management, where I would handle half the day with the kids, he would handle the other half. In many ways, it kind of forced this like ruthless prioritization in terms of like, how do I spend my time? What are the meetings that really have to happen? And it basically meant I kept my one-on-ones with my team, some leadership syncs, but for the most part, actually pushed to take many reviews offline and create new processes that allowed us to do things offline. Like historically, we had been doing product reviews always in a meeting with large groups of people, and we moved to taking 50% of them offline. Like actually, many of us can do a lot of these reviews offline, comment in a doc, and then if we really need a meeting, then have a meeting. And also for me, because I was missing half the day, I was missing half the meetings, I created a flags document, because also we get so much email that I will miss things in email. And so my team knows they can flag things to me daily. And in some ways, I think it was helpful for the rest of my team to see that. I noticed some people on my team as well did the same thing. They realized, hey, I can't handle kids and work, so I'm also going to move to this sort of part-time schedule. And to be honest, the productivity hasn't dropped. It's actually the same. This is like the interesting fact is like we actually can get smarter about the way that we work and in many ways be much more efficient. And so even after COVID and after shelter in place, we have been saying we're going to keep a lot of these things. So, and Rose, anything you want to add on your side?
Yeah, on my side, one of the things I've been pushing for with my team is how do you connect and create community during COVID? Especially since I was a new leader, right? I need to get to know 50 PMs remotely, right? So there's a couple of things that's worked really well for us. We started this tradition called Real Talks. So it started with these like small group gatherings, right? Where like whoever wanted to show up could, and folks on the team would talk about parenting during COVID or how to deal with burnout or how to think about, the juggling, like priorities because we're dealing with hardware. So how to do hardware during, work from home. And then these have turned into like weekly emails where one of my leads will do kind of a 5-minute, like, here's how I'm feeling, making it really raw and authentic. I've also run some fun, interesting COVID offsites. So part of it is just getting really, again, creative. So, and also leveraging, our chance to be a little more authentic as leaders. So I taught a yoga class, actually 80s aerobics / yoga class with another lead on the team. There was a trivia session that someone else ran. We did virtual bar crawls where folks would host like themed, happy hour rooms. So part of it, I think also is just trying to find a way to connect with people because it's so hard right now, right? We don't have all the tools available to us. So that's part of something I've been thinking about as someone who's taking on a new group of people to get to know and have to form relationships relatively quickly.
Erin, anything you want to add there?
Yeah. The other thing I'd say, just in terms of starting new initiatives or teams or just reacting to the environment that COVID makes things differently, is we're in the middle of a crisis, both racially, globally in this country, but also like a global pandemic. And it's interesting to think about how crises force you as a product leader to innovate, whether it's proactively or reactively. And we're seeing this across the board, right? And so I'm leading racial justice at YouTube. And again, this is born out of a crisis where we're looking at ourselves and our platform and our products and thinking about the ways that we can just make YouTube safer against hate and harassment, the ways that we can innovate to create culturally relevant spaces through the product experience. And those are things that just weren't even on the radar. They weren't on the roadmap, 7-8 months ago. And so that's exciting. Also, I lead sports. And, sports leagues their business models are being completely disrupted and upended because fanless arenas and stadiums are going to be a thing for the next potentially foreseeable future. And I think as product leaders, now is such a fascinating time to kind of think about the next set of problems that the world will need to solve. And then whereas we can, as product leaders, can think to innovate our existing products or build new things to solve this new set of problems. And we haven't even begun to think about the implications on travel and how we'll live and whether cities will be a thing going forward or not. And so all of these are really, so I just think it's an interesting and exciting space, even though we're in the middle of a crisis. And I think the next generation of product leaders will be the folks who solve that set of problems.
Yeah, like the famous Churchill saying, right? Don't let a good crisis go to waste.
Yes.
I think that's such a good note to end on. It's, yes, like tremendous upheaval, but also opportunity to reimagine what things might look like and to make them better. And how might we be a part of that, right? And so thank you for kind of, summarizing that so succinctly, Erin. So on a personal note, if you could tell your younger self, your earlier self in your career, one sentence, you could write yourself a little note and send it to yourself when you embarked on the product journey or a few years ago, what would that be?
My single sentence would be, Erin, you got this. There are so many times when we question ourselves because all of these exogenous signals tell us that we don't belong. And that inspires imposter syndrome and all sorts of insecurities. And the reality is that we've all done the work. We're prepared. We're probably more prepared because we're aware of these realities. And so I wish I could kind of calm the fears that I've had throughout my career and frankly my life around belonging and around preparedness, to say it's going to be okay. And that the reality is that just as many of those exogenous forces that kind of are telling me that I don't belong, there's just as many people who are rooting for me. And it took me a long time to really figure that out. And so I think there's a ton of power in that. And so, yeah, you got this.
All right, I can go next. I was thinking about this, and if there's a single thing I would tell myself a few years ago, it would be remember your career is long and there's always more opportunities. So I've been shifting from a mindset where like you're really focused on like, this is the one thing I have to make it work, or there's never going to be an opportunity like this again, to be like, the world is abundant, right? And open, and just being more of an optimist, and having a broader perspective.
Cool. For me, it's really just, I would tell my younger self to not be afraid to fail, to go for the things that make you uncomfortable, because the best moments of my life, I feel like, have come out of those moments.
And I would tell myself a few years ago that it's not a linear path. Actually, in my growth journey, I've often had times where I took a role that seemed like smaller scope or smaller team and ended up being huge amplifiers for me in my career and huge stepping stones. And you have to integrate like what you know analytically with your gut on like what's right for you at that moment, which is sometimes hard to do. And so I want to summarize. There were so many insights. I'm not going to do it justice, but I want to mention 4 key themes that we heard today that I hope you all can take with you. The first is the ability to reflect and the ability to create this distance between what is happening and who I am in it, right? Erin talks about it in meditating, but it's also just so interesting to hear all the speakers not saying, okay, when something bad is happening, that isn't necessarily me. It's just something that's happening that I am responding to. And in that space, there is agency for me to step up and respond in different ways. And so that is such a key insight and ties into the second thing that we heard as a theme today, which is the ability to persevere through so many different things, right? Even Lilian, when she's talking about how her family moved around the world, just adjusting to different geographies, languages, and finding your anchors, finding what anchors you and helps you persevere through those times. The third is self-care. Not everyone can run 13 miles a day, but what is that gives you that ability to recharge, that, you know, and self-care, like the famous saying, is self-preservation. And then the fourth is, how do we not become a slave to the impressions? How do we create a place that is sane for us, that we can sustain for long periods of time, that is authentic, that is vulnerable? I know that's hard. That's kind of like a tall order where I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to do all those things. But the reality is showing up with humility, showing up with reflection, showing up and saying, I can't do it all, but this is what I can do really well, is kind of what I'm hearing from this group today. So I hope that's useful to all of you. And we are grateful to be here today, and we'll head into Q&A next. Thank you, everyone.
Hello everyone, my name is Devika and I'm a product manager at Google. I would like to start by congratulating you, fellow women PM, because it's very likely that you're equipped with a superhuman skill that is needed now more than ever. Yeah, I just said that. It's very likely that you are actually equipped with a superhuman skill that is needed now more than ever. But first, let's talk about the state of the world. We live in the age of information. Data is way more valuable than oil, and answers to any question is probably available at the click of a button. Where does all of this information come from? This information comes from human beings. It comes from people like you and me. Technology has handed all of us a metaphorical mic, or even a literal mic, where we can share our truths and tweet our opinions. So it turns out that a lot of people have a lot of opinions, and in a lot of cases, those opinions may not match your opinion. I was reminded of this recently when I visited a public space and I had to hand over my personal information for contact tracing. A couple of days later, the marketing team requested some feedback from me, and I was like, this is a huge invasion of my privacy. I handed this information off to you for contact tracing and you're contacting me for feedback. One thing led to another, and you can find the tweets on my handle. But what I realized is that a lot of people have opinions in a lot of important areas, and that matters. For example, the existence of climate change or the effectiveness of masks in controlling a global pandemic, or even the equality of human beings. These decisions dictate our future. These decisions also dictate the future of our upcoming generations. So we're being hit with information from all over the world. And with information comes its evil, sinister twin, misinformation. And there is no easy way for us to disambiguate fact from fiction. Many would say that this isn't the age of information, it's actually the age of misinformation. And it's probably true. But I'd go a step further. I believe that we're at the cusp of witnessing the coming of a new age, and that is the age of empathy. With lines between facts and opinions blurring, it is not just having more information that will help you succeed. You will be presented with views that would differ from your own. But the people who are bringing in these views, they're still people. So that brings me to my final point. Traditionally, the world's definition of success revolves around what social anthropologists called masculine traits. We see leaders as being strong and not gentle. We see them as being courageous and not sensitive. We see them as being assertive and not empathetic. As women, we put an undue amount of pressure on ourselves to align with this definition of how the system defines leadership. And there's nothing wrong with that, except there is everything wrong with that. We forget why we began to become world leaders in the first place. We probably began to make the world a better place for us, our family, and our society. And the society is made of human beings. In order to make positive change for society, we need to be able to have the capability to hear what people have to say. And especially in a world that is now more polarized than ever, the most important skill to have is empathy. And from my very limited experience of being a lurker on Twitter, I have 3 pointers for you that will help you thrive in this new age. 1, don't run away from the conversation. Don't run away from people who may have an opinion that would be different from yours. 2, listen to them. Listen to these people and understand where they're coming from and understand their life experiences. Humanize them. 3, question. Question their beliefs. Ask them why they feel the way they feel. And don't stop there. Also question your own beliefs. Try to find a common ground. Bonus. Social anthropologists actually believe that we're set up for success to lead humanity to a better place. And I'm confident that we will. Thank you for listening.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our lightning talk on teaching product management fundamentals, aka PM 101, here at Google. My name is Abby Daniels, and I'm the PM for CS First at Google.
And I'm Yana Yushkina, the PM for Search and Chrome, also at Google. Abby and I both made mid-career transitions into product managements, and we believe that great PMs can emerge from different roles and bring unique, diverse skills to a product org. So why does Google offer PM 101? First, we recognize that we didn't have a good pathway for mid-career talent to explore product management. Historically, Google required a CS degree or a dev background for PM roles. The legacy impact of that past requirement left many believing that they didn't have a chance at becoming a Google PM. This course was a way to reintroduce and open up product management to more Googlers and help them understand what the real requirements were. In more practical terms, we also wanted to help aspiring PMs develop the fundamentals of what makes a good product manager and connect like-minded learners. None of this would have happened, though, without the passion of current Google PMs who got together and asked themselves, how might we grow a cohort of PM talent in-house? The course was traditionally in person with a long wait list. We knew we wanted to scale, but for 2020, we were still on course to repeat the same in-person model before being interrupted by COVID. So instead, albeit with a 3-month delay, we launched as a global MOOC in July 2020. We had over 1,000 Googlers interested initially, and more than 200 completed the entire course. That's 30x growth. Before we jump into the details, here's what our students would see on the course site. To teach PM 101 to over 1,000 students, we needed to expand the modality in how we deliver curriculum to showcase a diversity of content, as well as engage students while being remote. One modality we were especially proud of were practical applications, which were tied to a real example of a PM artifact that students would be expected to create as a product manager. For example, we asked students to define their team's North Star metrics or KPIs. And how did we do it? To transform the PM 101 course into a MOOC in such a short time, we needed more than just PMs involved. It definitely took a village and required over 150 hours to create the 9 weeks of content. Chronologically, that means we spent 4.5 months from kickoff to going live. Now off to Abby.
Great, thanks, Yana. I'm excited to share about what we taught and learned from this cycle of PM 101. Our 9 weeks of content covered everything from what a product manager is to deep dive on key skills such as technical competence, working with UX, influencing without authority, or even how to prepare for the PM interview. For the sake of time, we're going to move ahead to the next slides. But if you have any questions, feel free to join us at the interactive session to learn more. We'd also now like to transition to talk about our key learnings from PM 101. Thanks to weekly assessments and surveys from students, we got a glimpse at what topics students found most helpful. We saw topics emerge within 2 buckets, the what and the how. What do you need to know to be a good PM, such as product excellence principles, and how to do product management well, such as working cross-functionally and building trust. In our eyes, these are equally important. A PM that lacks empathy for the user is just as ineffective as a PM that doesn't know how to build a roadmap. Another element we had a hypothesis on, but wanted to learn more about, was the importance of creating a learning community. We knew we needed to respect different time zones, student backgrounds, and of course, the asynchronous needs that we all have during COVID. We put some detail on the slides about what worked well, and I will say that in 2021, we hope to engage more PMs at Google to serve as near-peer mentors. At the close of our first online PM 101 course, we saw 24% of all enrolled students complete the course in full. We're really proud and excited about this number, and so grateful for all the students that came alongside us in learning. We all know that diverse PMs create better products for diverse users. And it's our hope that this course enables prospective PMs from non-traditional backgrounds to emerge. We're already seeing a diversity of background roles and a diversity of location in our current cohort, with students from over 60 offices present in this class. So in closing, if you're thinking about building out programs for teaching product management at your company, please reach out. We'd be more than happy to share learnings, and we're excited about the growth of PMs everywhere. Thanks for enjoying our talk, and have a great time at the rest of Women in Product 2020. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Valerie, and I'm a product manager on the smart home ecosystem team at Google Nest, focused on the energy and health and wellness verticals. I am going to talk about building a more resilient ICU. The theme of this year's conference is resilience, and I can think of no better example than our healthcare workers in 2020. In March this year, we started getting calls from hospitals asking if we could find a way to help them better care for their surge of patients with COVID-19. ICUs were starting to get overwhelmed, and a lack of PPE was putting doctors and nurses, the people we most needed to care for the ill, in harm's way. So we went about finding a solution for ICUs. First, we needed to understand what problems we were setting out to solve. We knew that healthcare workers were most at risk of getting sick due to their close contact with patients and the resultant elevated viral load, and that PPE was running out in a time when they needed it most. We needed to find a safer way for healthcare workers to care for their patients. We couldn't make PPE out of thin air, though intrepid nesters did find great ways to make PPE and distribute it. We took a different approach, which was to try to reduce the number of times a nurse or doctor needed to go into a patient's room. Our goal was to scale healthcare worker interactions with patients and possibly minimize PPE usage through a remote monitoring system built with Nest scans. Our primary goal was to keep healthcare workers healthy, allowing them to do their jobs. But what does it mean to scale healthcare worker interactions? What are the goals of healthcare workers in the ICU? After discussion with very kind and very busy ICU nurses at Mount Sinai, we built our solution around 3 pillars. First, patient monitoring, as visual cues are key to patient status. Second, patient communication, so that patients could ask questions and healthcare workers could speak to the patients and help them remotely if possible. Finally, providing efficient care. Hospitals found that when constantly donning and doffing PPE at the beginning of the crisis, doctors and nurses were more prone to make mistakes because of the stress of a more burdensome process. So, to match our 3 pillars, we built a 3-pronged solution. The first was a management console for the cameras, allowing hospitals control of setup and permissions. Hospital IT and administrators can add and remove cameras from different stations or groups and give caregivers the appropriate permissions for each station. The second is a grid view of all of the cameras in a nursing station or ward available on one screen. Here, healthcare workers can see a grid view of up to 12 cameras per screen and have a choice of 5-second refresh stills or a live stream grid, depending on their internet connection. If a healthcare worker needed closer viewing or communication, they can expand any single room's camera. From here, they can see an enlarged live stream as well as open communication with the patient by clicking on the microphone button and speaking into their computer. Finally, we made this solution available by web console so that healthcare workers who are not physically in the ward could help if needed. The kicker to this whole solution, though, was that through sheer force of will, we got to HIPAA compliance in fewer than 10 business days. After deploying a few hundred cameras and learning from the healthcare workers who use them, the results of our project were distinctly not what we expected. We found that PPE usage did not decrease because with the cameras, nurses were able to continuously monitor patients and could see issues come up or before they happened and respond quickly. This resulted in about the same number of patient visits per day or the same PPE usage, but better care for patients. In the end, we didn't actually succeed in our primary goal of saving PPE, but we actually solved a more enduring problem, one that we hope will continue to be helpful in hospitals even after this pandemic, which is to help nurses and doctors have eyes and ears, everyone in their ICU, all at once.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kat, and I'm a product manager at Google Research, working on building infrastructure for responsible ML for Google product teams and in open source. Today, we'll learn about what ML fairness is and why it's important. From there, we'll look at how a team can design and build with fairness in mind throughout the developer workflow. And finally, we'll talk about the tools and resources that are available in TensorFlow that can help with the process. What is ML fairness? I get asked this question a lot. The real answer is a disclaimer. There are a lot of definitions for ML fairness, and we'll go through just a few on the next slide with examples. In May of 2016, ProPublica conducted an analysis of the Compass risk classifier that aimed to predict whether a defendant was likely to commit another crime.
This information was used to make important decisions such as sentencing and time to parole. They found that the classifier was more likely to falsely classify Black defendants as reoffenders than white defendants. This is unacceptable behavior, devastating the lives of many Black defendants. This is also a violation of equality of opportunity, a common fairness definition. Equality of opportunity is achieved when examples from two groups have an equal likelihood of being classified correctly or incorrectly. In the Compass case, the Black defendants were more likely to be incorrectly classified as high risk. This concept relates to the familiar confusion matrix notions of false positive rate and false negative rate. Under this definition, these metrics should be equal for both racial identities. Let's look at another case with the Jigsaw API, which aims to detect threats in text. The user texted two clearly non-toxic sentences that were essentially the same, but with the identity term changed from straight to gay. However, the sentence using gay was perceived by the system as likely to be toxic, with a classification score of 0.86. When used in practice, such as content moderation system, this can lead to the systematic silencing of voices from certain groups. This is an example of a violation of counterfactual fairness. In this definition, changing a single identity term should not change the prediction of the model, considering both sentences are non-toxic to start with. Where does bias like this come from? Bias can enter the system at every point of the ML workflow, from defining the problem to deploying and entering the monitoring stage of development. At every step of designing and building the model, we should be asking ourselves questions to keep fairness in mind. As we go through this, keep in mind that these are important questions, but not the only questions to consider. It's a great starting point to kick off the conversation, as I've experienced working with both internal and external teams. The first part of the process is to define the problem and the user, as well as identify where things might go wrong. Is this a use case that is known to be sensitive, such as facial recognition, or an algorithm that uses sensitive health data? The next step is to consider the data that is being fed into your model. Is the training and evaluation data representative of the product's target population? What about bias in the data that could be introduced by human labeling or other collection methods? In building and training your model, you have access to methods that will help ensure the fairness, privacy, and robustness of your model. Is it important to train the model in a differentially private way, or such that it's easily interpretable? In the case of fairness, there are specific losses and constraints that can be used to help ensure that certain fairness constraints are met. During the evaluation step, it's important to look at both overall performance as well as how your model is performing for marginalized groups. There are a variety of metrics and definitions that can be used to indicate performance, but some may be better suited for your use case. In the Compass case we saw, false positive rate was especially important to test for because consequences associated with a false positive result, which means high risk of reoffending, greatly affected a defendant's well-being. It's really important to measure the right things. Finally, it's critical to think about the feedback loops that are associated with your model. Are there already marginalized users leaving the platform, leaving you with even less data about these people? It is also important for regulators, end users, and other developers using your model to understand the details of your model, as well as the associated risks. As you'll see in the next section, we've developed tools to help standardize and automate this type of reporting. These are a lot of questions to answer. My team makes tools that are integrated into the workflow to make these questions easier to answer. We launched the Responsible AI Toolkit in TensorFlow in July, which includes a set of resources, tools, and examples on how models can be deployed with fairness, privacy, security, and interpretability considerations in mind. I'll highlight a couple of the tools my team has worked on. Fairness Indicators is a tool that computes fairness metrics across different slices of data, allowing you to evaluate your model at a more granular level. The upcoming Model Remediation Library helps you to remediate bias for a particular sensitive group based on research methods that take fairness into account during model training. To promote transparency, the Model Card Toolkit plugs into your TensorFlow workflow to generate the core components of a model card, similar to a nutritional label for models. These tools were developed in collaboration with various research teams at Google, are being used internally, and have been open sourced as part of the Responsible AI Toolkit. Learn more about the tools you can use to build fairness into your ML workflow at this link. Thank you so much.